Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Creating Web3. I'm your host, Tiffany Monahan. In this episode, I talked to the founder of No More Mondays. I found this conversation absolutely fascinating, and we got to talk about what is my personal passion, fashion and fashion concepts in Web3. And Brede and I covered topics all over the place, such as how to think about accessing different metaverses experience, the relationship of physical and digital, and so much more. Let's get started.
My name is Brede Rørstad. I'm the co-founder of No More Mondays. It's a creative studio in Paris. We work primarily with luxury clients around the world. You could say that we do surface design, so we create artworks for anything from t-shirts to dresses to haute couture pieces to crazy runway things and everything in between. And we have a small team in our studio here in Paris, and we, because we're not artists in the sense that we do only one thing. That's the exciting thing about working with prints and fashion. You have to be able to do everything. So one day you're doing watercolor, the next day it's like super fine detailed pencil drawings, and the next day it's like digital manipulations, and so it's kind of all over the map. So, but the common denominator is that most of our work ends up on textiles and dresses on men and women around the world.
Just before this, you were showing some examples of the works that you do as far as embroidery, weaving, fabric treatment, even some 3D modeling and printing. And all of this we can think about as surface design. And many of us can imagine surface design in the physical world. And what does this mean for you as far as in the digital world? And how did you take that studio experience physically and then start to bring that into the digital world as well?
Well, that's been a bit of a process, and I guess you could say it still is a process, just like that space is developing and being built as we speak in different aspects. But my partner, she comes from fashion, and she used to work in-house in places like Alexander McQueen and Givenchy and Balmain. I come from music. I've worked in advertising. I worked with like experience design. So I'm very much like on the different side of things. But now we've been working together for about 5 years, and my idea was to also see how we can build something on her fashion story career, but also then expand into other areas, and that includes interior design, for instance, home textiles, and as of the last couple of years, like we've been exploring more 3D tools, which also led us to through NFTs and Web3. And I mean it's interesting. It's like it's a new world that's been built, and there's a lot of surfaces that are being built in the metaverse, and we aim to fill some of them with beautiful designs.
As far as, we're thinking maybe we can start with the metaverse and how there's a number of different metaverses being created. There's a number of different digital assets across these metaverses. And, in between each one of them, there's a different experience, a different type of user, a different person that's drawn to that metaverse. And I would be curious to think about how you and your team maybe are thinking about those different environments and even those different kinds of users or visitors that might go there, and how that would influence some of the design work that you're doing.
That's a really good question. We're sort of like studying, and we're trying to think deeply about this before we start building. Because I think it's easy to create digital garments, and you can find ways to present them, and maybe even find people to view that experience and sometimes even buy the NFTs, and that's fine. And there's merit to that, and it can be successful and interesting. But we're really trying to coming from fashion and sort of having been to these fashion shows that people in the Web3 space sometimes love to hate because of how exclusive they are. And there's just something interesting about I mean, there's one Givenchy show that I was at one time, and it just my girlfriend snuck me in, and it's I'm not sure what name he went under then, but Anthony and the Johnsons. All of a sudden, he was on stage with an orchestra, and it was just like there's 1,000 people, and there's like a pile of cars in the center as a centerpiece, and then the model starts walking around with these garments, and it's really like you just get this feeling that this is like the point of gravity, culturally speaking, at this moment. Like this is like the epicenter of culture in the world at that very moment. There's nothing more important culturally happening, and there's not very many times when you get that feeling, when it's sort of like when the stars align, metaphorically and specifically,
and literally,
literally
in the front row.
Exactly. And there's just like there's an electricity to that, and the reason why I bring up that example is that. So I mean, it's easy to dissect why that is magical and why people line up and why people want to go to the after parties and why people want to have proximity to celebrities and all of this, the circus, as you may call it. The interesting part becomes then, okay, how can we do something in a digital space, knowing that we have few to none of the same things to rely on, as far as like the presence in a physical space where there's I mean that's just a lot of energy in and of itself, and then the narrative around, or the expectations, the buzz, the electricity, and knowing that you're going to see a lot of times spectacular, incredibly well crafted garments that people have labored over for weeks, sometimes months, and it's all like built on centuries long traditions and developments of craftsmanship. So that's like kind of like what fashion is like in its purest form, maybe, and then you add all the noise and the
Instagram filters.
Yeah. On top of that, but just like so we're trying to like understand, okay, how can we create an experience in a digital space that is worthwhile, that it's not just like trying to mimic what happens in a physical space, because I don't think that doesn't really work. I mean, we've seen examples of that, and it's not to sit in front of your screen and watch a digital one-way show. To me, it's just not interesting, and it's not for me. You're not asking the right questions. So yeah, long-winded answer, but I think that's like kind of like the most challenging thing for digital fashion, to really carve out that like meaning and like what is sort of the purpose.
Yeah.
And for me, just add on one last thing, I think the most helpful thing for me the most helpful way for me to sort of stay interested and intrigued by digital fashion and the Web3 space is that it comes down to the creative possibilities and opportunities that it unlocks. And I think that's a great place to start.
And so with, there is so much potential to unlock. It is a totally different environment. Like you said, there's none of the same tools and resources that we have in the physical world. And what I took away from your description of the Givenchy show that you were mentioning is there's this element of craft. There's this electric environment, really a mood. There's music. There's this whole sensation, and I think you said it really well, like that's the point of gravity culturally, and you really feel like you're part of something. And so all of this, I would go back and say like it comes from a drawing board at some place where the design team is, working around a specific idea, what they want to create, and something unfolds along the way. And so I think that creative process is super interesting, how it exists today, and, can look like something totally different in Web3. So I would be curious about what's maybe like your first early days, like trying to figure out the digital design and what it is, if you had any kind of like unlock moments where you're like, this is something to explore, this is a new potential that we didn't see before in the traditional craft.
Yes, I mean, I guess before that, like I had a moment where like the first time I heard about NFTs and just like sort of when people started, but fashion, like how start to make parallels and how that could and will become important. And I had like I think a lot of people do, like when it comes to new things, where we become less and less malleable the older we get, and I think we're not automatically prone to like embrace new things, some more so than others, and I noticed I had like a moment where I was like, I felt resistance against it, and then split second later I was like, and that's why I need to like jump on this, because I just felt there was something in this space that
resistance is a good sign.
Yeah, because just like recognizing that it's like, it's one of those things that I'm like, but can I even be bothered? It's like, it's like, let me just get back to what I know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I had like sort of I want to say, kind of like a powerful moment, at least looking back at it, where that sort of like sprung me into the space. And then, since then it's been like learning and exploring and but really like thinking a lot about it conceptually, and just like trying to understand like how to use it, because it's ultimately it's like, I believe that everything that creatives do comes down to an experience. We're not limited to creativity either. Like, technology is completely pointless if it doesn't move the user, if it doesn't stir something in them. And I think similarly, like if you as an artist or a musician or a playwright or anything, or designer, if you're unable to stir a reaction, it could be good or bad, negative or positive, in your audience or whoever experiences it, then it's pointless. It has to create. There has to be like a kernel of truth somehow that like gets communicated, that gets transmitted through whatever creation is sort of is created, whether that being physical or digital.
Yeah, and that's what you were saying earlier about when you come with an idea, you want to start a project or a new collection. It's because you want to communicate something.
I think it can be a cliche too, but I think it doesn't always have to be this way. But I think it's sometimes important to make it a little bit difficult for ourselves to say, okay, why am I doing this? And like the simplest questions are the most difficult to answer, and and so if you can answer why, to why you're designing something or creating something, then chances are it'll be good. After that, of course, you have to find a way to sort of transmit that or communicate it effectively. And then there's tools, there's creativity, there's skills, there's craftsmanship that goes into that. And it's storytelling, of course.
Yeah. Why Web3? Why a technology that's decentralized, or why this digital realm?
I think people have their own motivations, and I think you can, like in Web2, there's idealism, there's greed, the full spectrum. I'm unsure if for me it's not necessarily the decentralization that's like the most important thing. It's not what sort of motivates me the most. I'm a creative, and that's how I operate. So for me, it's about the creativity and the possibilities that it unlocks, and of course, there's something. there's something exciting about just knowing that it's like there aren't that many people. I mean, it's so early that I mean, there's so many options to do something for the first time. I mean, that can be exciting. But for me, it's like what I'm the most excited about is just like, yeah, finding new ways to create something beautiful, and using a whole new palette and just different way of like interacting with people. And so I think there's just like an endless amount of possibilities, which also makes it the most difficult thing in the world, because it's like the more possibilities, the more difficult it is to like really hone in on like the one thing. But
yeah, it's like you have a whole new creative spectrum, and how do you bring that into the metaverse or into one-off digital assets, and you have a whole new world you can create in some cases.
Exactly. Sorry about that little sound effect there.
Yeah. It's like, is that a cat?
We're powering down the system. I mean, there's different layers to it, and I think it's important to like, at least for how I approach it, it's like to have some fundamentals in place. So like, I mean, ultimately, it's like it's you can bring the same ideas, you can bring the same motivation to the space. You can. It's not like everything is. I mean, we're still the same people interacting with it, and I'm thinking more and more about it as digital being a layer on physical. I don't necessarily think that digital fashion anytime soon will be hugely impactful in a purely digital form, outside of like gaming platforms maybe, and like very specific like high resolution, high poly environments where people are already like engaging.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, like, fashion in and of itself is not interesting. Digital fashion in and of itself certainly isn't. It needs a context, it needs a purpose, it needs bodies to move on, it needs to be it's like a text that needs to be read, like it needs to engage with the user. If it doesn't, it's not serving any purpose. Which again circles back to the challenge of digital fashion. But I think, I think about it as like, I mean, the whole, like, I think we're opening them up more and more to like metaverse not being like one sort of space or one world or metaverse or whatever. I think it'll be spaces that we go in and out of, but I think what we will interact the most with is AR. And I think at least like when we're thinking about, okay, how do we want to like enter that space full on, then it's with that in mind, that because I don't think, first of all, I don't think like a mass market to go to that extreme will be embracing like a fully digital experience for a while to come. And we're still also like in digital fashion, there's a lot of assumptions of what's to come in the future. So it's like it's building on assumptions of what's to come and things that may not be in place already. So it's all like building for the future that that's been built as we built for it. So it's like a parallel thing, which is
we're building it as it's unraveling.
Yeah, it's like you're driving on the road as it's being built.
Yeah.
It's like you just gotta watch out.
You just gotta keep going and watch out. Yeah. Well, I actually have to agree that I think that the digital will be a layer on the physical, and really the gamers in the gaming world, they're the ones that are maybe more ready for a fully immersive type of metaverse experience. And I also think it's interesting to think about the digital and physical and how context is created for that interaction. So how do you see this intersection, especially for No More Mondays? How do you see the intersection between digital and physical?
Well, I just want to follow up a little bit with what you were saying before, because I mean, by all means, I don't think like I don't mean to say that like a purely digital experience is not valid, or it's not something that I mean, if people can make that work and sort of, you know, figure that out, I think that's fantastic. But I'm thinking more like in the concept. I mean, you know, we're old school in a way. Like we come from physical fashion. We work with brands that, you know, have factories around the world, in Italy, and, you know, wherever, and you know that, like, so we're like part of that sort of way of doing things and way of thinking. So that obviously shapes how we think. So for us, I also think about, well, okay, how can we bring people into the space? How can we make Web3 and digital fashion interesting to say luxury brands, or maybe more importantly, people who buy and who are interested in physical fashion? How can we make those people engage with the digital space? And our thesis is that, well, then we need to make it relatable. We need to speak a language that they can understand. And I'm always like conceptually intrigued by sort of this space between fiction and reality. That there can be a small gap sometimes, that it doesn't have to be like a big leap. And I think a lot of times, a lot of the digital fashion that we see has, there is a big leap. And there may not even be a string to the balloon to sort of the real world, or like the culture that we see around us. And that too is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think we maybe do ourselves a disservice as far as like if our goal is to help people come into the space and to grow an audience, to grow a market, to you know, which is and will be important. I think we need to base it on some assumptions that people need to understand why they should care, and then I think we need to go to the, you know, into their emotional, their space of like, okay, this is something I can relate to, not as a compromise, but more as like as a framework to work within, and something that can be explored creatively.
So I want to go into this deeper, because two things come to mind. One, I'm curious of the brand's reactions so far, and what you've seen from them, and I would love to get back to that. But first, I want to clarify this gap between fiction and reality. And so when you're explaining this, the thing that comes to mind is, so this week is Paris Fashion Week. And so we just saw on the runway, you know, bags made out of ice. And I'm totally blanking on the designer who did the... The hands made out of condoms.
Yeah, with blue liquid in them.
Yes, but they were very like digital-esque. But to me, this is, when you're saying there's that gap between fiction and reality, it's like we see them walking down the runway. They have this very like digital-esque shape to their hands, and it's very kind of like animated in the real world. And that to me could be a gap between the fiction and reality. But I'm curious for you to explain more of what you had in mind there.
No, but I think that's a great observation and parallel, and I think that's kind of like where fashion is at its best. I think a lot of people will say that today that fashion isn't very creative, like, because it's so commercially driven and it's about selling, you know, the bags and, you know, all the stuff. So you have fewer. I mean, of course, like the big brand, I mean, it's the smaller brands that will do more of that. But I mean, you still have examples of like very eccentric presentations and shows where you really, like, your mind is taken on a journey, you know. And I think, I mean, I always come back to Alexander McQueen. Like, I mean, his robot show, for instance, like where the model is like spinning around, like pivoting around in a white, big sort of fluffy dress, and then there's two robots that are like spraying her with black and yellow paints as people are watching, and it's just like it has, I mean, it's like a completely different experience, you know. And I think we have to like look to those kind of like moments, because who wants ordinary? I mean, why would we make digital fashion ordinary, like right off the bat?
Yeah,
you know, like it should be exceptional. It should be like, it should be pushing the boundaries of what's possible and what people can understand, and or not. Well, or like, but still, like, you have to bring people there. You can't just like create like something and it's like be the arrogant artist and say, well, it's your job to figure it out. You have to bring people along on that journey, and I think that's, you know, when we're talking about like, it has to be done, like, you have to communicate efficiently, you know, so you have to give people the opportunity to understand it. You have, you know, there's a storytelling, there's like, you have to understand who you're talking to. That's in a way.
When you go to the brands that you work with today and you explore this idea of digital fashion with them, what is their reaction?
Well, I've just stopped you there because we don't. Because why would they talk about digital fashion? I mean, they sell physical fashion. Brands won't do anything that can jeopardize their physical sales. So, I mean, every endeavor that's done by brands that you've heard about in the digital, in the Web3 space, I would say that's well, maybe Dolce & Gabbana is different. Maybe that's one of the few examples of the other ones. If you guys haven't seen that, you should definitely check it out. It's like beautifully crafted pieces that were like digital twins of some of the dresses. But anyway, what I was saying was that it's marketing.
Right now, the digital
fashion. It's all coming from marketing, or I mean, maybe there's like new tech or innovation officers or something like that. That's like, those are the people who you'll meet at digital or like metaverse conferences or whatever. Like, it's not. I mean, the people in the studios, the creative directors, are busy designing clothes and products for the next fashion show. So
they're totally siloed from the.
100%, completely different organizations. I mean, it's like, I mean, any big organization, you will have different departments. You know, it's like, you know, you have HR, you have research and development or whatever. It's like you have the people on the floor. You know, it's like all these different cultures, and yeah, like just like in fashion, it's, you know, the people from that side, they may or may not work in, I mean, well, they work in fashion obviously, but it's like their skill set aren't necessarily about design and fashion. So it's about selling it. It's
interesting because it makes me think of work I've done in the past with e-commerce, where I remember I was talking to a jewelry brand and they were explaining, like, this week is the first week our e-commerce team talks to our store team. I was thinking, like, to me, the e-commerce store and the store are the same. Like, the fact that even recently, those like digital and physical platforms that maybe now in like the lens of Web3 are old, they still can be siloed in a lot of brands.
But I mean, I get it too though, because it's like, I mean, the brands we work with, I mean, they're always so busy. Like, I mean, there's so many collections in a year, and like they're cranking out work, for better or worse. But to think that they should, I mean, even to like talk about 3D and to have that be part of their workflow. I mean, famously, fashion is the last industry to digitize. I mean, in a larger picture, nothing's changed the last like several hundred years as far as like how fashion's been created. I mean, it's still, you know, it's an idea, it's paper, it's pencil, it's, you know, fabric, scissors, thread, needles. And then, okay, enter computer, it you know, enter sewing machine. So, I mean, there's like technological sort of like things that, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, there's like lots of things in there, but like overall, like, I mean, 3D is like, it's a luxury to my knowledge. Is just starting to become a part of companies' workflows, because it's complicated to implement anything new, because it's like people learning a whole new way to work. And I think it's more about like all the people that are in school now studying fashion. I mean, more and more that they're coming in with like 3D knowledge already, like they already know that as a tool. So it's like it's becoming their new Photoshop in a way, and I think that's kind of like what the 3D tools will be. But I think it'll still take years before 3D is implemented like into the workflows, but and creatively and then towards production
of the established brands.
Yeah.
And then so My new favorite word this week is storied. So for maybe more storied brands who have a strong history, a strong legacy, they will have this journey to go through to enter into digital fashion. But I'd love to hear from you what your vision would be for a digital first fashion brand to enter, meaning that you maybe you have experience in the industry previously, but to build something where you say this is digital first. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think there are many takes on that. We are exploring for ourselves what that will mean for us and what starting a brand that is Web3 native, digital first will mean. I believe that, based on what I was saying before about digital being a layer on physical, for me, I think it makes sense that we attach it to physical products too, in some way. And so that digital can be a layer on top of something, so that I think it just, like, storytelling wise, like, to connect it to the real world, and so that people can be, okay, they can be holding a physical piece in their hand, and then there's a key to have a digital experience that sort of spins out of that somehow, and vice versa. And I think that can help to, I don't know, there's something, we're so physical. I was kind of surprised by this, but like, I think it was in May I saw this. So Harry Styles came out with a new album, and in the first week, I think he sold 186,000 copies of vinyl records, like the old school black records.
I probably have like 300.
Yeah. I love them. I'm actually, I have to fix my record player turntable. But and the interesting fact, that number is big, obviously, but the interesting fact is that is the fastest, highest selling record in that physical format since 1991.
Wow. Which
obviously predates the internet, MP3s, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think it's just an example of, like, we shouldn't, like, underestimate the importance of tactility and physical. And that doesn't mean that there's not room for digital only brands and experiences, of course. But since we come from physical, it makes sense that we sort of that we attach it and tie it into that.
Yeah. Well, I would question, if Harry Styles didn't have such a strong digital presence, because we could also argue we are in the metaverse already.
100%.
If he didn't have such a strong digital presence, would he ever have had sales like that on vinyls?
No.
On a format, how many people who bought it actually have a vinyl player? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But again, okay, so that brings it back to, like, the idea of, like, collecting and the objects that we surround ourselves with, and which then translates to digital collectibility and unique ownership and that sort of limited. That's something that not everybody has, kind of thing. So I think it all ties in to, like, the same mechanisms. So for me, it's not either or. It's becoming more and more obvious that it's, like, both at the same time. It's like they're, just like NFTs. I think it's a good analogy. Like, if you think back to MP3s, like, that was a big sort of, like, shift, and, like, shook the whole music industry. And it's like a simple sort of compression technology that sort of, like, made it possible to share music online, which hadn't really been possible before. And so MP3, like, people talk about MP3s. We downloaded them illegally. We bought them on iTunes and paid money for these MP3s, and so I still have, like, thousands of them on hard drives, like, I don't know where.
On your iPad or iPod.
Yeah, exactly. And similar, we talk about NFTs today in a similar kind of way, or have been. The interesting thing is that we are essentially listening to, it's a better version of MP3s, but we're listening to sort of a derivative of MP3s every day when we use Spotify or Apple Music.
Yeah, this is going to be an MP3
Exactly. But we're not talking about MP3s anymore. And similarly, we won't talk about NFTs in the future.
No.
It's like, it's the infrastructure. It's the sort of the envelope where something is put inside.
Yeah.
So it's the content that matters. It's not how it's delivered.
And we'll be saying digital assets. That's the new one. Set of NFTs.
Well, that's a sexy word, isn't digital asset? Yeah. No, it's like all these buzzwords. It's like they get worn around the edges. After like a month. It's like a.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to keep up.
I mean, let's not mention Fidgetal, please.
No. But I want to try something here because last week I was in London for a Web3 conference, and I was so excited because I'm also based in Paris, but I love going to the bookstore. Everything is in English. I'm like, yes. And I found this magazine that was called MacGuffin Magazine, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
It's called what?
MacGuffin.
No.
And like each issue is an object. So like there was like the table, the chair, the bed, and this one was the chain. And I opened it and I was very not interested, but I was like, there is a like a blockchain section, and I was just at this conference and I was like, I'm interested to see how all these things come together. And it was just this concept of a chain. And so the first thing I thought of was like a chain of jewelry. And so that's the example that they start off with is they're talking about hip hop jewelry and how having like the biggest necklace or the biggest chain is really a symbol that you made it and you've accumulated a lot of wealth. And so there's Rick Ross, who has his chain that's like 1.5 million, and it's like a diamond encrusted Rick Ross wearing a Rick Ross chain. And
if that isn't Mezza, I don't know what.
Yeah, exactly. But then the magazine goes on to say there was the human chain that was a form of protest that brought together the Baltics and their freedom from the Soviet Union. And then there's this concept of man the hunter and woman the gatherer. And woman the gatherer, she invented threads, and like in the context of fashion, I think this is super relevant. And whether this is anthropologically true or not, I don't know. But she invented the threads that come to create clothing that we're wearing, but also you could say chains in general, because you're bringing together fibers. You start to create these systems, and you have like everything in this room, it's been created in a factory that's built around chains. All of the mechanisms are running, our bikes, our cars, things like this. And now we have this blockchain where it's a totally new type of chain, and it's a totally new opportunity. And, it's just this one concept, one chain. And you can say like, okay, it's going to be jewelry. Okay, it's going to be a protest. Okay, it's going to be like fibers or tech. And the concept has gone into these different areas. But no one ever pulled out like all these things are made with a chain until hindsight. So nobody was like, I have a chain, I want to make jewelry with it. I have a chain, I want to protest with it. I have a chain, I want to make like a bike or a t-shirt. But we see that commonality now through it, and creative process and ideas and the different realms that they can exist in, whether it's art, music, fashion. I feel like sometimes maybe we want to take it into like digital way, what we have right now, but it's the same as being like, I want to take a chain and do all these things with it, versus like having something being born out of digital and see like maybe we create a whole new art form or a whole new like design language. You can even argue it's like a conceptual way that we've thought.
The community aspect of Web3 really sort of ties into that chain idea, where people are connected through, sharing, value or communities are built around so many different things, but like, the prospect of what a platform can do, or a new technology, or a new game, or a brand, or all these things. So I think that's like, and yeah, that definitely ties into I mean the people sort of attaching themselves together, because it's like, you know, kind of what you're doing by joining a community, when you're doing that in a sort of
Like a
meaningful
Discord.
way, yeah. And so I think, and for me that was like the first big thing, and I like just like how people were. It was such a small community, like on. It started on Clubhouse.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah. That was a
Wasn't that-
flash in the
I
pan.
know, right? And then Twitter just like flipped the switch and it's like bye. But anyways, so just like these talks there, and like I was on them like every day, like speaking and listening, and it just like that was like the first big thing for me, just like how people would just like be on these stages in these rooms, like explaining NFTs, like how it works and blockchain, and then people would like it's like sort of like, you know, kind of like these like shows that were back in the past where like people would call in like with, you know, with a problem or something, or like they would get advice, or and it's just like something like really like human and intimate and just honest about it, and like everybody was so giving, and all these people who were up on these stages and like, you know, carved out sort of a, you know, a space for themselves and a personality, and like, you know, and gaining knowledge and sharing it with other people. They're, you know, they're probably like, they have companies now, and like they're probably helping others like in the space or whatever. So it's like all these people, I mean there's so many people like looking back at it that were like nurturing this community and helping people in, and it was such like it was a really special thing, and you get so sort of like idealistic about it, and it's like, oh, you know, the community part, and it's like I still believe it, and I think there's still that exists still, but there's but I mean the reality of, and you know, the greed sort of you know, put a bit of a stick in the wheel for it in a lot of cases, where it just becomes about the hustle of like, you know, making that dollar, and pumping those investments or whatever. And so, but I still think there's something to like that community part, and I think that's something that we gave a talk at a design conference September last year, I think. No, yeah, it was last year, and it was right before Meta announced or Facebook announced their name change. Name change.
Yeah,
Name
change the
change.
game.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we talked about like how principles from the Web3 space could potentially like create a new economic system in a way of like how, I mean, saying things like, well, you build a community, you don't build consumers. Like these kind of things, like if we change the language around how we define the interactions and the people that we work with or that we sell and share a product to, because it is an exchange, right? And we've made it so transactional and so like unpersonal. And I think and yeah, we're consumers, we're customers, and we're, you know, we're being marketed to. But I think there's something really interesting and potentially like, excuse me, very meaningful about like focusing on those, because there are some values there that I mean it comes from, I guess it comes more from computer programming and open source idea, and where it's more about like the promotion of the idea and the technology getting better, and people building on what you built, and just like that sort of I'm not sure if honor is the best word to describe it, but like that.
Like respect.
Yeah, it's a whole different way to relate to it, and I think that's obviously a big part of Web3, like that mentality and that approach. And I think that would be, I think to start a brand today, I mean, we ask ourselves, like, why would we start a brand today? Why would we make products? I mean, it's the last thing the world needs, you know, more products. But maybe if we do it, you know, and just like change the narrative and like change how we interact with people. And I think, you know, having a Discord server for instance, like where you can interact with people. And it's like, okay, maybe you can say, okay, instead of like me making a product and then saying, hey, here it is, like buy it. It's like get to know your community and your user base, or however you want to describe it, and try to understand how you can bring something to that community that adds value to, not necessarily, I mean, not monetary, but to their experiences or to their, to their layers of reality.
I think that this is a great note to end on, because it ties back to what you were saying in the beginning, where going to the show, you have this point of gravity, this cultural center. And I think that that's what we're seeing now with the development of communities. And I think we saw it with Clubhouse, who arguably does it better than Twitter Spaces. But I think that you're right, that's really, there is so much there. There is this experience. Being a part of it, you do feel an electricity and an openness and connection with others. And I would love to just ask one last question is, as far as digital fashion, is there any designer that you're watching, that you're excited to be following, that you think all of the listeners should check out?
I think everybody's exploring. I think maybe, I mean, I don't know exactly what they're building around and like where they're going with it, but I think conceptually and executionally, I think Ouroboros as a duo from London, I think they have something very unique, and it seems like, I mean, it's very own sort of like, for me it's kind of like a sci-fi kind of aesthetic, which but just like conceptually, I think they have something very interesting. So I'm very intrigued to see what's coming from them next, because I know they have money now and they're building something and who knows what.
Yeah.
But I mean there's lots of interesting things, but I have to be honest to say that I'm still kind of waiting to be blown away.
I would agree. Ouroboros is a good one to watch, and same, still waiting to be blown away. And maybe we'll see it with the emergence of physical and digital.
It's coming for sure. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, once somebody like manages to really like tap into how to create a sort of shared experience somehow with people in a digital space, then things will explode.